that pairs up great Bitcoiners for compelling discussions that are unique here in the Bitcoin content scene. I am Brady Swenson, head of education at Swan. Before we dive in, I want to give a quick word about the service we're providing here. We believe that we have built the best way to automatically stack sats. We allow you to connect your bank account. You'll auto fund USD into your Swan account. We automatically convert that to Bitcoin on a regular basis. You set the frequency, and then you can set up automatic withdrawals to your own address. We are working on XPub support so that we can rotate those addresses and not have to reuse your automatic withdrawal address. We have a lot of other awesome innovations coming to the product. Daily buys are on the list, so watch out for that. Jan and team are working day and night to improve the product experience. So, check us out, keep an eye on what's going on, and give Swan a try. We do all of this with low fees. We are up to 80% lower than Coinbase for recurring purchases, up to 57% lower fees than Cash App for recurring purchases. You can get started at swanbitcoin.com/HRF for the Human Rights Foundation. You'll get $10 of Bitcoin dropped into your account, and every single one of your recurring purchases will support the work of Alex Gladstein and the Human Rights Foundation. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. And finally, if you're not aware, we are chatting in Telegram at t.me/Swan Signal. We've got about 1,000 fans in there. We're chatting through the whole episode. We chat, of course, throughout the weeks between the episodes. It's turned into a really cool Bitcoin channel, t.me/Swan Signal. All right, let's get into today's show. Today, we have Samson Mow. He's CSO at Blockstream. I'm sure almost all of you know Samson. And we have, of course, Parker Lewis from Blockstream. He's head of business development there and is well known for his Gradually Then Suddenly blog series. I think this is an awesome pairing.
This is huge news. Parker joined Blockstream.
Yeah, we're making the announcement here. Yeah,
Unchained. I'm even wearing the shirt.
Brady has the shirt on. Everything. He didn't have the Blockstream hat on, so things got mixed in the ether.
I was in the flow, man, and that just came out. Yes, Unchained Capital, of course. Unchained Capital, Gradually Then Suddenly series on the blog. And look, we're also joined by co-founder and CTO of Swan Bitcoin, Jan Pritzker. What's up, man?
Hey guys, I couldn't miss this chance to talk to you fine folks.
All right, this is great. All right, let's jump in. We've got an awesome panel. I think everybody is going to really enjoy this one. If you can't catch it live, of course, you'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/SwanSignal and swansignalpodcast.com. All right, let's jump into talking about the very fascinating macroeconomic geopolitical situation we find ourselves in. Let's kick it off with Samson. There's some interesting kind of give and take chess play, maybe three-dimensional chess that's happening between kind of the two of the global superpowers, the United States and China. Hong Kong is right in the middle of it. Can you give us an update on your thoughts about this whole situation that we find ourselves in here?
Well, I haven't been following the news that closely, but I'll try my best. So from what I've seen, there's like rumblings of a new Cold War. There's a bit of posturing on both sides. And I think the most recent thing was the US asked China to close a consulate or embassy in the US, I believe in Texas or something like that. But correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. But, I think this is just where we're at today because you have two superpowers and they're vying for control and influence. And, that's where Bitcoin comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other thoughts from Parker or Jan about the recent, bill that passed unanimously in the Senate or Congress through Congress about, I think, not recognizing Hong Kong anymore as a special zone?
Yeah, I think I would be similar to Samson here. Probably at least on the geopolitical landscape in the last week have been more heads down on the work front. So have kind of what I've caught has been more kind of headline based. The former employer that I work for, Kyle Bass, I generally get a lot of updates from him on what his views are on what's happening in China and Hong Kong, but haven't touched base in the last week to really have an up-to-date or informed view of what's just happened last minute. I think that there's clearly kind of macroeconomic trends and implications of what's happening in the global economy with the COVID shutdown that are putting strain, it seems like there were geopolitical tensions as is, and then as economic trends are slowing down, I would say not necessarily artificially, but on an accelerated basis, that only certainly strains tensions. And then when you have two central banks kind of maneuvering to support both economies that oftentimes work in opposition to each other, it kind of creates extra issues that wouldn't otherwise exist. But we also know that there are issues that are going on with Hong Kong, and that there are political issues and kind of whether it's kind of entering a new Cold War era or not, that the actual economic problems that are existing right now only further to strain those tensions.
Yeah,
I think
there's
a lot of the politicians. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think people are always looking for, then what's the next enemy, right? Like if terrorism is defeated, and then what's the next enemy? Like China seems like a pretty good enemy to pick. They're different from us, right? They have different cultural values from us. And this is not, I'm not in support of totalitarian governments at all. But I want to just point out that governments in general, they always need some opposition so that people are focused on why should we spend all this money, because we need to be better than China, right? We need to show the world that we are the leading superpower. And that just gives them license to do more of the same.
So I just want to add, usually the politicians want to distract from troubles at home too. And the economy is not growing as fast in China. It's stagnating because of the coronavirus. And I think it's pretty much the same in the US. So it's a really good way for them to, hand wave problems at home away.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that these countries, the sort of secondary powers as they have been over the past many decades since, the 1940s, when the US really kind of claimed the mantle of global superpower and the US dollar became the global reserve currency. Do you think that they kind of smell some blood in the water, a potential to, invoke or, encourage a currency crisis that maybe even, spurred on by monetary policy choices at the Fed? And now we have this, extra player in the game theory called Bitcoin that is really going to make this situation extremely interesting. Do you guys think that we might see some, like nations really try to grab at some of that power vacuum using Bitcoin? Let's start with Parker.
I think it's an interesting kind of thought process to go through, and I think, and I don't think these are my own kind of unique thoughts. I've had conversations with Saif on this subject, and there's a reality where I think if I was sitting, again, I don't want geopolitical or actual war between countries, but there's a lot of power that's exerted around the world through the U.S. dollar, and there is, if I was sitting in the U.S. and looking kind of around the world and saying, hey, if you were interested in destabilizing the dollar, then Bitcoin would seem to be a kind of an independent monetary system that kind of would be perceived as neutral. Like you couldn't potentially claim that someone was doing it as a direct attack, though it could be perceived as one. So it could be a tool to use. But then there's also the reality that once you go into the world of Bitcoin, you are also giving up control, and that whether or not you have two competing central banks or two competing governments that are kind of fighting for world dominance, even if it's not kind of in an actual war, they both within their own countries exert a lot of power through the function of their currency. And so while it may seem, I don't want to say logical, but that would seem to be a tool that they could use to, whether you didn't like the position of the U.S. dollar as a geopolitical foe of the U.S. dollar, if you went over to a system that was based on Bitcoin, you would also be giving up control. And so while it may seem logical on one side, if they're ultimately kind of exerting their own power through their own currency, it becomes kind of a catch-22, and it may not be an attractive offering. I think about it more that you have two, or really any country that has a currency that can be considered a reserve currency status, that they naturally exert power through that currency, both internal to their economies as well as external to very different extents. And there's almost I view Bitcoin as this world operating in parallel. And while the governments are fighting it out for world domination, whenever I find somebody, regardless of what country it is, that they see the power of Bitcoin and want to adopt it, I know that we're thinking about the world in some common way.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see what happens between countries that can't trust each other and need to trade, right? I think there's like this force of digitization that's happening. We have all these central banks saying they're going to digitize their currencies. They're going to be central bank digital currencies. I think the way that I imagine it is paper money is really a relic of the past. I think most of us use digital payments day to day, and within 1, 2, 3 generations, it's going to be wiped out. There's really no point in having paper money. Something like COVID has really brought that to people's light, right? In every store, it's like, we don't accept cash anymore. We only want digital payments. Nobody wants your dirty money, your virus-laden money, right? So what happens in that world where all money goes digital and countries still have to settle trade with each other? And then there's the United States with basically their finger on the button saying, okay, we don't like you guys. Let's just turn that off. You can't have US dollars. You can't have US dollars. People are going to need a system that works. I think it's just way too early for Bitcoin to be that system. It's just too small for those kinds of trades. But as it grows and people need a system where they can't trust each other and they need a settlement system, why would it not be Bitcoin? I think it's a very likely possibility that it will be used at least between any two countries, right, that decide to settle any trade in this kind of neutral currency. Then start off this chain reaction, because now they're using this thing and they're giving it value. Nobody else is, and now they have to play catch up, right? So I think there's a certain chain reaction that gets started if that takes flight.
What do you think, Samson? How's it going to play out, man? There's obviously it's like kind of on a needle, like pins and needles. Who moves first, and do they have an advantage? And or is it going to play out that these smaller countries might go toward Bitcoin, and there's some kind of united front by the world powers to suppress Bitcoin and try to ignore it and demonize it?
I think I talked about this on another show. I forgot which one, but it was the theory of which country will adopt Bitcoin first. And my idea is that it will be probably the more prone to fail countries that are having political, economic issues that will adopt it because they have no recourse. They have nothing else to use because they can't print money anymore. I think the bigger countries and superpowers, they're probably going to go it first with a CBDC, central bank digital currency, because if you have that dominance and that power, you don't want to cede that on your own volition, right? You're going to go and try it. It's like, if you have the guns, you have the military, why not print your own money and try to vie for dominance in that arena? I think there is interest in the US from the Federal Reserve to look at central bank digital currencies. We know for a fact that China central bank is going for a central bank digital currency. So, as a Bitcoiner, I think it's better if they just all opt for Bitcoin, right? For cross-border settlement, for the benefit of their populaces, that they cannot print money, inflate the money supply. But that's the alignment between the incentives of the people and the governing powers is not always in sync. So I think it's going to be a while before a major superpower or country decides to go the Bitcoin route.
Yeah. Well, what do you guys think about geographic mining distribution? Do you think that will come at all to play in kind of geopolitical struggles? We know that, a good portion of mining is in China, seems to be distributing slowly but surely away in terms of percentage of total hash rate from China to other countries. Do you see this as a good trend? And do you think that a certain nation having a large percentage of the hash rate makes a difference to the Bitcoin network? Jan, or whoever wants to start, just speak up.
I can give a brief answer. I think that Bitcoin is secured by more than mining. It's secured by the nodes that decide what is or isn't Bitcoin. So I'm not that concerned about quote unquote mining centralization. I mean, I think over time, whatever advantage somebody had in their natural resources, right? Like let's say China has a lot of remote regions with hydro dams, and we can get really cheap electricity there. Well, that's an initial advantage, and that creates a certain amount of centralization. But then over time, people are incentivized to hunt for cheaper sources of energy. So we see things like, stranded gas on oil fields and up in Canada, things like that, development of wind technologies. All of this stuff over time is going to get distributed, and it's going to be based a little bit on like luck of the draw, how are your natural resources, and a little bit on innovation. What can you do with the stuff that you do have? Can you harness wind better? Can you harness, your hydro better than other countries? And I think there will be a bit of a space race there, even if it's just a matter of national pride, right? Like, why did we go to the moon? It was partially to say that we are the ones that made it to the moon. It was America. And I think there's going to be some of that national pride in being a producer of Bitcoin hash, like we take national pride in being a producer of oil or gas today, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean, I was gonna. I know that Blockstream is more involved in the mining side than Unchained is, but so I'd love to hear kind of Samson's views on the same. But I think that there's just a natural reality that as Bitcoin's like, if you think about every layer of Bitcoin as it grows, everything naturally decentralizes, both in terms of the distribution of who holds the currency. Kind of, if you had gone back, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, there were a lot more people that would have had, 50 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin. And as just naturally value increases, that the currency gets distributed, and then as the value increases, it also, kind of it's a dynamic equation. But mining hash rate increases just as the mining hash rate increases the total. Naturally, that who's controlling that hash rate decentralizes over time. That it is a natural function that as the network scales and grows, that every function within it increases. And so, as we've seen over the last 10 years, the nominal reward for Bitcoin in terms of mining in aggregate has gone down, but the total purchasing power of that reward has increased. And those economics, as they continue to increase as the Bitcoin network grows, naturally demands that competition, the natural functions of the competition will take over, where everyone will be going and looking for the cheapest sources of energy. And if they are in China, a lot of mining will be in China. And if they're in West Texas, there will be mining assets in West Texas. And the economics alone, in large part, will help sort out, any, I think, perceived, kind of centralization of mining. And then we see companies like Blockstream, developing their assets in North America as well. So.
Yeah, so I think it's good to decentralize the mining hash rate. It's better if it's spread out more or less evenly around the world. I don't think it's as big of an issue, though, because if you really think about it, okay, so let's go back one step. I think the biggest concern about the centralization of hash rate is that a nation state could co-opt it and launch an attack on the network. But I don't believe that's actually that likely. It would really co-opt the rule of law, right? If a nation state would seize an asset like that, then they're able to seize anything. And that would really damage their prospects to be considered a global player, a place where people can do business. So if you imagine the likelihood of something being seized in the US, I would say it's roughly the same likelihood of something being seized in China. Of course, it is possible. Anything is possible, but it's not going to be really conductive for them to say, come to our country and do business. And, with the economy the way it is now, I think, for example, for China, they really want people to come and do business. That would really violate a lot of foundational trust in the ability to work with any entity in that country, because you'll just fear, like, if I set up a factory, is it going to be just whisked away under my feet? The hash rate, I think, is generally moving out of China, and that is a good thing. So like Parker has mentioned, we have Blockstream Mining now, and that initiative is largely because Adam and I realized that, if someone doesn't start moving outside of China, then hash rate will never really go anywhere. it'll be a slower process. So we wanted to speed that up. So we started up Blockstream Mining, which is, a kind of a big step for Blockstream because, we're a software company and now we're a mining company and software company. So I think it's important for skin in the game that every company does a bit of mining. And one of our goals with Blockstream Mining is it's a hosting structure. So you can buy your own ASICs, host them with us, and you can mine with whichever pool you choose. You can use our pool, you can use someone else's. But the idea is that we have a way for people to start mining short of building up their own data center, because that is actually, I would say, the most challenging part. It's very capital intensive. You have to do a massive investment in buying transformers, buying equipment, building out the facilities, and all that stuff. And then you have to buy the ASICs too. So typically that will be very daunting for anyone to swallow. Like, I got to do all this stuff to start mining. But hopefully with our service, we can take a bit of the pain out of it. And that's why we can get interesting people into mining that may not have been mining previously. So one of our clients is Reid Hoffman. We also have Fidelity as a customer and a lot of others. And I can't disclose who they are, but they would not normally be mining if there was not some easy turnkey solution for them to just jump into and start.
That's awesome. It's almost like co-location for mining, like back in the ISP days. If you wanted to run your own sort of direct connection to the backbone, like a T1 backbone, you could co-locate some kind of like broadband modem and use it. I did the same thing and used it to serve like my cul-de-sac of people and friends when we were like
Nice.
upgrading from our BBSs. Yeah, that was fun. We thought we were awesome. So that's really cool, and I'm glad to see that the diversification of mining, and it's really getting very exciting. The idea of using hash rate and the blockchain and hash rate as sort of a battery, a store of value for accessing power that's very remote, that would require a lot of expensive infrastructure to transport to locations where it's needed. Really cool developments, and love the arguments and the response to the very common FUD that Bitcoin is going to destroy the planet and melt it down, with like, oh, actually, guess what? It's going to save the planet by encouraging ever more efficient renewable energy. Pretty amazing. All right, so I'd love to kind of pivot and talk about the emergence of this Bitcoin only industry, and it's really coming about. And Blockstream was one of the early companies, sort of before this most recent spate or phase of Bitcoin only companies that kind of led the way. But we're seeing the emergence of dozens more now that are really dedicated to Bitcoin only, really dedicated to being good stewards of the blockchain, to educating about Bitcoin, and to acting as kind of a front to what we all anticipate to be sort of another wave of altcoins, ICO, scammy madness as number goes up. What is your guys' take on the emergence of this Bitcoin only industry, and do you think it's viable in the long term? Do you think now is the time to really start a Bitcoin only business? Parker, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll talk about how maybe we think about it at Unchained, where I think I certainly have economic views as to why we likely only need Bitcoin in terms of the monetary asset, and why Bitcoin will likely monopolize currencies all over the world. Or I believe Bitcoin's directly competing, and that when we think about the incentive structures of money, that there's a natural economic force that will cause money to monopolize. And so I think from an economic perspective that there's a natural shift that way. And then when we think about it from a business perspective, kind of setting aside kind of an economic perspective, looking at just the addressable market of one currency representing 60 to 70% of the overall value, but then on a liquidity adjusted basis, it's 90%. So would you rather focus all of your time and energy on figuring out how to service 90% of the market and doing it really well, or be kind of expanding your bandwidth? And then there was a time at Unchained where we, when Unchained launched, and then the second product was supporting Ethereum and just supporting the technical architecture of that. There's not native multi-sig, and supporting Ethereum nodes is inherently harder than supporting Bitcoin nodes. So there's kind of the economic perspective, the business and addressable market perspective, and then just the technical perspective and the ability to the ease of which you can develop on top of Bitcoin. So I think the natural kind of combination of those three things leads to a focus, kind of exclusively on Bitcoin. And if you're doing that, then you're naturally going to be delivering better value to your clients. And curious to hear Samson's perspective, but I know when we had our Bitcoin meetup in Austin and Alan showed us Liquid, who's the Blockstream's director of product development. And I immediately looked at it and I was like, oh, well, this removes any need to issue, a token with its own blockchain because they could issue it on Liquid if they wanted to. So there's a lot of other kind of future possibilities. It's not the fact that Bitcoin will be the only thing in the universe, but that there's a lot of things that can be built on Bitcoin that are currently being built on other blockchains that I think ultimately will be replaced on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin-only businesses are a good thing. If I'm looking at it from the perspective of a customer, I would feel a lot more, I guess, safer just knowing something is focused on Bitcoin, because there's a lot of risk if they're running a bunch of other shitcoins in their architecture and supporting all those things. They're probably more distracted. There's a constant threat of security breaches. There's the story of Cryptsy, right? They're running some lucky coin or something stupid, but that thing opened up a hole in their systems for a hacker. But there's a lot of benefits to being Bitcoin only, just from a focus perspective. But I think it is challenging for a business. So if you're an exchange, I used to run an exchange, there is a big need to drive revenue, and shitcoin trading is a revenue driver. So the question is, like, should we admonish an exchange for chasing exchange revenue, or should we just accept it? I guess that's a question for Bitcoiners to decide, right? But there are benefits to having exchanges just be exchanges. So, for example, I think BSV was delisted from a whole bunch of exchanges, but Bitfinex left it. But they're funding Peter McCormack's defense against Craig Wright. So it's like they're taking the BSV fees and just rerouting it to defend their attack on Peter McCormack. So I think it's a really interesting dynamic, and I prefer Bitcoin only, but I think it's not realistic to assume that every company out there is going to go Bitcoin only.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I also think that, while I have my economic views as to why Bitcoin will win, you can use as much as you would like about kind of intellectual kind of ideas around economics as to why this should happen, but ultimately having a market test and say, because I do believe that competition is good for Bitcoin. So create, I don't, certain type of actions could be viewed as attacks on Bitcoin, but Bitcoin Cash existing and people being able to see in the market how much other people value one versus the other, and people being able to, in a free market, build on top of Bitcoin or try another currency and see if it works. That kind of the cold hard facts of kind of market value and the market figuring it out, by and large and much more definitively helps people understand things over time. So I don't have the perspective, and it's like, within Unchained and what we're doing, it makes sense for us to be focused on Bitcoin only. But I think I'm sympathetic and agree with Samson that in part, many ways, not just from a revenue driver perspective, but from if you're going to support a free market, you want kind of people to understand this, that having market tests and having kind of a free formation of ideas is a positive thing.
Yeah, I think.
So if you think,
go ahead.
Oh, so if you think back to the fork wars, the prediction market for SegWit2x futures was a very important tool in this destruction of that attack on Bitcoin, right? If that market was not there, it's really questionable what would have happened. But because the market was there, and because Bitcoiners could vote with their money, you could see very quickly that this was going nowhere, and it's going down into the ground. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners made a lot of money on that bet too. So I think the ability to have a free market is important. And maybe the line is how much one of these venues promotes that, those other things, like the shitcoins. Like, are they saying buy this, like Coinbase style? Like, here are 100 shitcoins, buy them all, buy this bundle? Or do they just say, here's something we're listing and you guys can decide for yourself? And even better, they could disclaim it and say, there are risks with this project. It's not Bitcoin. It's not nearly as secure or decentralized, etc. Kind of like the disclaimers on a cigarette package or something like that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you guys. The focus of building a Bitcoin only business is huge. You get, lower customer acquisition costs because you're only focusing on that marketing, that one thing. You get lower support costs because you're not focusing on supporting all these other coins. Your development costs are lower. Obviously, you're not actually building stuff out, and security, of course, is a lot tighter. I think these are all really important aspects. I also would say that I think Bitcoin and altcoins are almost like two different things, right? So Bitcoin is this idea that we should have this scarce deflationary money, freedom money decoupled from states, all this kind of stuff, right? And we're trying to get people to buy into this general idea and market Bitcoin to them so they understand why they're buying it. And that's kind of like, I think, the mission of a lot of Bitcoin only businesses. And then you have altcoins, which are basically like pink sheet trading, right? Like people trade penny stocks. A lot of them have no fundamental value. A lot of them are known to be garbage companies, but they still trade them, and they trade them to make money, right? And so altcoins are traded to make money, and money is US dollars or Bitcoin, depending on your perspective there. But basically, that's what people do, right? And I think the industry has been forced into that. Like Samson said, there's a lot of short-term revenue in altcoin trading. There's over 5,000 coins now on CoinMarketCap, and Coinbase is coming out with tweets saying they've listed 60 of them. And it's like, okay, well, what's the future of that? Is it going to be 600 a year from now? When is it going to be 6,000? At which point, coins are created every day. It's very easy to do that, right? So I think if you're building a business that's oriented towards trading, then you're always in this kind of rat race of, well, what other new thing am I going to add to keep my customers motivated and interested? And look, there's nothing wrong with gambling. People want to gamble. Okay, go with God, gamble as much as you want, right? It's not my place to tell them not to do that. But I think that when we build Bitcoin only businesses, we are taking a moral stance on like what we're really interested in is the future of money. And we're trying to get you the better money. So come to us and buy the better money and, and use it and so on, versus come here and trade and try to make money. That's kind of a different thing.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin only businesses offer something very important. They provide a signal to the market. Swan Signal, that Bitcoin is important, and it helps to cut through that noise of the companies that are just listing things nonstop, right? Like it's like Jan says, where does it end? I don't really think there is an end to this, right? There's always going to be some new project with some new angle and some retail investor that's going to eat it up. So you need that signal to tell people, Bitcoin only is important. Bitcoin is important.
Yeah, and I think part of that signal is, and it comes into the minority rule idea, where it's like every company that supports altcoin trading supports Bitcoin, but then that there are companies that are Bitcoin only is a very loud signal, because if there is a company that's exclusively focused on an altcoin, I don't know about it, and that there's while there may be certain economic and ideological reasons, there's also business reasons for that, where I may, now I do, I'll send people that I know to a combination of Cash App, Signal, or Swan, and River to buy Bitcoin, not just because Coinbase is, trading a bunch of altcoins, but because, like you guys said, your focus is exclusively on that. And over the long term, I expect that product to be better and to better meet the needs. Now, if somebody comes to me and is like, hey, I'm looking to trade a bunch and I'm a day trader, I'd be like, okay, you're not going to do that on Swan. Go to Coinbase or go to Kraken. But that I also recognize in that time that those exchanges are important assets for Bitcoin at the same time. That they are liquidity centers, and liquidity centers are important.
Coinbase is not an important venue.
Just on a liquidity profile basis, but that will likely shift to whether it's or other kind of ways that people are trading Bitcoin today. They're still not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. It's like you can kind of lambast them for being deceptive with their marketing. This is actually why Corey said this, our CEO, and I really agree with him. Like people don't really hate on Binance very much because they never pretended to be anything else, right? They're a trading platform. They always were about giving away Lambos and like, come gamble here. They always said that very loudly. Coinbase purported to be a Bitcoin on-ramp and kind of shifted into like, now let us educate you about these 60 altcoins. And this framing of education and like, we'll pay you to learn about these coins is really not morally good, in my opinion. I don't know how to say it without being offensive, but it's not good, because you get, you people are coming there to learn, and what you're teaching them is basically false. Unless they believe this wholeheartedly, which I have a hard time believing that they do. They're not dumb people over there. We can dispute that, I suppose. But they're really asking people to quote unquote learn in order to really get them to trade. And we know that most people are just going to lose money trading. That's just the statistics of trading. So they're getting people to come to their platform to lose money, which is, I don't love it.
Well, the other good thing about Binance is that CZ can actually say the words Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Brian can't.
It's beyond me, man. I just don't get it. I mean, what is the deal? I don't understand Brian Armstrong. Okay, so let's, by the way, the Telegram chat room's going like nuts over Samson's Coinbase is not an important venue quote. That's getting out there on Twitter. So we have a question also from the Telegram chat room, RDS, and I think it fits in well here. We're talking about Bitcoin only businesses, and crypto only businesses. What happens when legacy banks? We know Fidelity has been in the game for a while now. In mass start offering Bitcoin and crypto custody solutions. How do you think they will fare against, the vanguard of Bitcoin and crypto only companies that really started this thing? Parker, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, sure. I think that I think that companies like Fidelity offering custody for Bitcoin and getting involved in Bitcoin mining are important for Bitcoin. And not only does it provide cover for anybody else who says that Bitcoin's for criminals, but that having those large brands be leaders is important. And I do expect the JP Morgans of the world have really shifted tune, and now they're banking crypto companies. And I believe most of the large banks are now clearing Bitcoin futures. And I think each one of those helps build credibility for the Bitcoin network. I think that more banks are going to look toward offering Bitcoin custody services. And I think that there is going to be a natural tendency for a lot of people that are involved in the periphery and that particularly get involved in adoption waves and in hype cycles to go, there's probably no better way to say it than the lazy route, that they don't want to do the work to really understand, why they shouldn't be taking counterparty risk. So I think that there is a risk of that, but I think that that's also just a natural progression. I think that when people initially get into Bitcoin, they're going to hold it one way, and that, naturally they will gravitate toward, I don't want to say holding it the right way, but that they will evolve and learn through that process. And that it's more likely that initially, as banks begin to custody Bitcoin, they do it in a more traditional way as banks do, but that even then people will learn about the right ways to store Bitcoin, and that there will always be a spectrum. I view it as a positive. I expect it to be increasing. I'm personally having a lot of conversations, less so with banks, but more with wealth managers that are recognizing that there's a place for Bitcoin in their clients' portfolios, and oftentimes the banks move based on how and what their clients demand, and that it would likely be a customer-driven wave where the banks recognize that if they want to maintain customer relationships, that they're going to need to deliver these products, and if they aren't, that they'll fall behind. And that just as there are with individuals, there'll be an education process for banks as to the right way and figuring out competition to develop solutions to store Bitcoin. I think that's all good.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that, it's like, if you don't offer Bitcoin as a bank, then the next one will, right? It's consumers demand it. It's inside of Robinhood, it's inside of Cash App, it's inside of these massive platforms, and you're really kind of forced to compete and have a solution. And I think it'll be a combination of some of these guys building it out themselves, maybe working in partnership with excellent businesses such as Unchained or Blockstream or Swan, for that matter, to build out these services. But I think these services are clearly coming. You know what I mean? It's you can't fall behind. You basically can't throw your hands up and say, I hate Bitcoin for criminals, because everybody else is doing it around you. And that in and of itself reinforces the narrative that Bitcoin is actually good. It's a financial product. You should have it in your portfolio. And whatever narrative makes sense, whether it's your financial narrative as a hedge, or whether you really believe in this kind of like deflationary money, freedom money future. People have different reasons for buying Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, those institutions are going to be forced to serve those customers.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Jan and Parker. Like a lot of people used to say, well, people still say it, right? Bitcoin will kill the banks, but I think Bitcoin kills the central banks. The banks themselves are not really a part of the problem. They just offer services and they're more retail focused. And I think they can make an active choice to survive or die. If they want to survive, then they need to give the people, their customers, what they want. I believe there's some news on CoinDesk Markets today. It just came out that US banks can now offer custody services. And that's pretty big news. And there is always going to be a segment of the population that will want these services. As much as Bitcoiners like to say, keep your keys, there's going to be someone that doesn't want to keep their keys. And it's probably better that they keep it with some reliable institution than to try to do it on their own or fail doing it on their own. At least this is part of the cycle. I think with the younger generation being born into a Bitcoin world, it's easier, but there will be older people that just are wary to take that responsibility or to play with a ledger or a Trezor or a cold card, and they just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I absolutely think we were seeing that with our customers. A lot of the older folks who comes on, they don't really want to do withdrawals. They don't know how to do it. They want to have it in custody. And then it's our job, I think, as a Bitcoin company to try to educate folks on how to take custody only when they're comfortable. Because I agree with Samson, it's way easier to screw it up if you're not ready than the chance of a licensed and regulated trust company losing your Bitcoin versus you losing your Bitcoin without having any knowledge of how to store it. So I think there's an educational component. I also think there's a user experience component with developing really good wallets. So I think things like Blockstream's Green or Casa or Unchained, these are all really good steps in the right direction. I don't think we're quite where I would say, okay, here, mom, just like go use this product. A lot of these are still pretty technical, but I have a lot of faith in all of us working on that to try to really improve the user experience so that it does become very easy and a no-brainer to set up your own custody. But we're in the early stages of that right now.
Yeah. I think Casa is interesting.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was just gonna say, I do think I envision a world where there's always this combination of needs, right? Where it's never like we do like to say, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, but we also recognize that if somebody's coming into Bitcoin for the first time, and oftentimes what I've found is for people to really want to engage to learn, they need to have some Bitcoin. And that really draws them in to learn more. And almost by definition, from the first time that you buy Bitcoin to the, T plus 1 month, 6 month, 12 month, you're going to know more. And that is an educational process. And so to expect, while it's certainly possible for people to go direct to that place, it's also not advisable in every situation or even 50% of situations. And I don't expect that to change, at least not to some far distant future where, kind of beyond you're describing, where things have been developed and they're easier and UI is built and the whole world's on Bitcoin. But I also recognize that I think when we often talk with Bitcoiners, which we say, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, it becomes more ideological. When I talk to either higher net worth individuals or larger institutions, what they connect with is counterparty risk, where they, they think about it as less like, okay, I'm not doing this for ideological reasons or sovereign reasons, but having a discussion where I had a large family office ask me, hey, when Goldman offers this, why would I do this with you rather than, or work with Unchained and hold my keys rather than work with Goldman? And I just simply said, because I can deliver it to you without counterparty risk. So, but even then, it's always going to be, both in individuals, businesses, family offices, there's always going to be a range, and having all of those options for people to transition and find the right solutions is really what's going to create better solutions long term.
So I think it'd be good if the banks go more of like a Casa route, or even buy Casa and offer a multi-sig custody where you'd have bank A with one key, you keep one yourself, and then bank B with the third key, or even some other institution, or Casa itself could be that third signer. Or I think this is a better model than just put all your Bitcoins in one bank and it's all under their control. I think there's like a happy middle ground somewhere. We just have to find it. And as we've been saying, it's still early and we don't know how this is all going to evolve quite yet.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think as more banks do start to custody Bitcoin and there's a standard developed that allows them to do collaborative custody, that's great, because you really are just distributing that risk and making it really, really hard. People trust banks. I mean, I'm not worried that tomorrow I'm going to wake up and my Chase account's going to be empty because Chase stole from me. I mean, this is still a rule of law country, and I'm not worried about my US dollars disappearing. And so I think people trust banks, and they will trust them even more if there's multiple institutions involved and you're holding one of the keys. I mean, that's pretty ironclad right there. So I think it's just a matter of user experience getting to the point where that becomes super easy to do.
Yeah, and that's also how we think about it, where we have a company like Tantra that's using Unchained, where they're a Bitcoin-centric business, but they're holding two of their own keys, and we hold the third. They don't have to invest in the custody or the Bitcoin technology stack, at least at the multi-sig and cold storage side. And then also a company like Amber in Australia, where they're able to focus on their core skill set and their core market and then leverage us. And so I do think as banks come into Bitcoin, that they'll oftentimes be looking to companies like Casa and Unchained or others that arise where they can leverage technology, but then don't have to recreate it all from the ground
up. Awesome discussion, guys. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn to another question that came in from Twitter, from Taibad Marshall. I hope I'm saying your name right, buddy. A longtime Bitcoiner, and having conversations with him a lot on Bitcoin Twitter. I'm sure a lot of you will recognize him. He wants to talk about Liquid and combating the FUD, like the 2 or 3 uses that aren't trading related. So what is Blockstream's bet on Liquid? Is the narrative of capital efficiency, inter-exchange arbitrage, the current use case? What are the plausible main use cases in the next cycle or the future for Lightning?
Well, that's a lot of questions all bundled up.
Sorry, for Liquid, yeah.
Right. So I'm always happy to talk about Liquid. I guess you could say the 2 main focuses at Blockstream are really Liquid and the mining side of the business. So for Liquid, if you don't know, it's an inter-exchange settlement network. So it's a way to move funds quickly between crypto exchanges, brokerages, OTC desks, anything. You peg in Bitcoin on the Bitcoin main chain into Liquid. So it's always a one-to-one relationship. There can only be 21 million Liquid Bitcoin. But on the Liquid chain, the blocks are faster. Every minute we get a block. So you have full settlement in 2 minutes. And we also have confidential assets and confidential transactions. So every transaction in Liquid, you really don't know what it is. It could be a Liquid Bitcoin transaction. It could be a Liquid Tether transaction, or a Liquid CAD or Liquid JPY. But it's a really big boost for privacy. And touching back on another point, the Bitcoin only thing, like one of the FUD points that we get is that Liquid is an altcoin, but Liquid is not an altcoin because there is no native currency. You only have Liquid Bitcoin if you lock up your Bitcoin and use it in Liquid, and you can unlock it by pegging out. The other thing is you do need a few things to trade. So before I joined Blockstream, I was at BTC China, and we kept getting pitched Liquid. We were actually one of the first to sign up for Liquid. And the value prop was you can use this to move Bitcoin quickly from exchange to exchange. But one thing I realized was, what's the other side of that trade? Because if you're trying to use it for arbitrage, you need to be able to bring it back either through USDT or some other fiat currency or something else that's stable. So I think that is another area that Liquid is beneficial, which is you can create a stable coin or another asset that can be moved back quickly along that same rail. And if you have those assets in Liquid, you can do things like atomic swaps, where it's a trustless swap. We construct the transaction and then we both broadcast, and only if we both sign will the transaction be executed. So that's a bit about Liquid. And I guess the question about where it's going is just where do digital assets want to go? So a focus for us is Liquid securities. So we're building this suite of services on top of the Liquid blockchain to handle things like security tokens. So I guess it's just a question of if people value security tokens and the ability to trade more seamlessly, to have 24/7 trading, and to do things like atomic swaps and have better privacy. But if that is where we are headed, then I think Liquid offers a lot of value for enabling those kind of trades and fluidity of liquidity.
Hey, I actually have a question, because this is something that I talk quite a bit with, or since the shutdown, I haven't been seeing some of the Austin Blockstream folks as frequently, but one of the things that I've talked about in the past was the idea that if you issue a security token on Liquid, the ability where I could potentially be transacting a security token, but then having the ability at any point in time to dividend Bitcoin to the holder of that token, because that's one of the things that one of the kind of flaws that I see in outside of Liquid, securitizing equity, is that ultimately it may make sense to track equity and ownership, but ultimately whatever company that is going to be earning some other form of money, whether it's US dollars or Bitcoin in the future. And that, there is a big challenge as it relates to trading, to know that, who's holding any stock in a company, such that when a company needs to dividend money, how do you do that? And I think from certain conversations, there had been some idea around that, or at least you were thinking about that. Is that something that you guys are working on developing?
Yeah, so that's definitely part of Liquid Securities. A company issuing with Liquid Securities will be able to create a list of their investors, and they'll be able to construct transactions to pay out dividends and the like. Right now, it's not all built into Liquid, but that's where things like simplicity will come in. So that's a smart contracting language that we've been working on for a few years at Blockstream. But potentially you could create this smart contract that would handle a lot of that dividend payout and other kind of, I guess, overhead for running a company and managing a security.
I think this stuff is super interesting because it's bringing the technologies, there's a lot of hype in the quote unquote blockchain ecosystem about we can build this or that. And what they're building are essentially databases with their own fake money. And the problem with that fake money is that it doesn't have value. What does have value is Bitcoin. So I think it's really interesting to see a future like Parker and Samson are talking about, where people are getting paid out dividends in Bitcoin, which is money, based on some database token of ownership, which is that securitized token. I mean, at the end of the day, that's using a database and coupling it with Bitcoin as money to deliver that promise that a lot of these other blockchains are trying to deliver. But at the end of the day, they're really just giving people tokens that are being traded against retail investors to fleece them, which is not a good situation. So I think a lot of stuff I see in the quote unquote blockchain ecosystem is very interesting, but it's like early because it's not done right. It has to be built on the platform that is money, which I think is Bitcoin. And that makes these services actually really useful. We just have to be patient with them to be built out properly.
Yeah, I think it's all coming. And TokenSoft is one of the platforms that has integrated Liquid Securities, also Stalker in the EU. And I know that TokenSoft is doing something very interesting with Liquid Securities. And it's supposed to be out in Q3. So keep an eye on TokenSoft in the next couple months.
Very cool. Very cool. And we're getting into perfectly into the next question that I wanted to ask. And this is kind of getting back into your world, Parker, before you dove down the rabbit hole. What do you guys think about structured financial products that incorporate Bitcoin, like high yield, fixed term deposits, life property insurance, performance bonds, volatility targeting funds, things like that? Do we think we'll see these sorts of Bitcoin-based financial products being developed? Is Unchained working on that kind of thing?
I do think over time, I mean, each different financial product, if Bitcoin's money, then kind of a natural product to go alongside of it is financial services. And I think it's still unclear exactly kind of what that future world will look like. And I think that, there will be a progression where certain products make sense as Bitcoin scales and as volatility decreases, and others will make more sense today. And so I certainly think that there will be, today we do Bitcoin backed lending, where we hold Bitcoin as collateral and lend dollars. I do, there's obviously people who are lending Bitcoin today. I think that there will emerge a world where, while I think that Bitcoin will largely result in a, financial markets will be smaller, or it will lead to definancialization. There will certainly be stock trading and bonds, and that probably when we get to a point where Bitcoin is actually stable, that people will actually be demanding Bitcoin to go do capital projects, and then it will be debt denominated in Bitcoin. Much of the Bitcoin denominated debt today is related to actually trading Bitcoin. But I think that there certainly will be capital markets that sit on Bitcoin, on top of Bitcoin, but their existence and the demand for those products will naturally evolve as Bitcoin scales and matures, and that they won't all, like today, I don't think it would make sense to be lending somebody Bitcoin to go build a project, where, in a world where dollar financing and all the customers of that person that's doing that project want to be paid in dollars. So it's almost dependent on density of Bitcoin holders and the volatility of Bitcoin for certain of those financial products to exist.
Sure. All right. So I'm curious. This is a question from Corey, founder of Swan, Corey Clipson. We'll start with Parker on this one as well. He's curious what elements of the economy and society today might have call option payoffs, and the inverse as well.
Well, I think Bitcoin has a call option payout. It's harder to identify. When Bitcoin exists, it's harder to focus your time and energy on other kind of asymmetric bets, because while I think of Bitcoin as both being asymmetric, it's also, in my view, not a low probability. I think when I think about the converse, it is really everything that's most levered to the credit system, that is highly dependent on the dollar credit system as a funding mechanism. So if I look to the world, I would say that the single market that is most, or the two markets that are most dependent on dollar credit or credit in general, are sovereign debt and then real estate. People, whenever they buy a home, generally pay 80% in a mortgage, and that mortgage price has artificially been manipulated lower through the function of the central bank. So I think about it, and then if I was just to conceptually think as a derivative of those things, just any market that is either advantaged or highly dependent on artificially cheap credit as a funding mechanism.
Jan or Samson have thoughts? You want to weigh in on this? If it's not
I would not bet against Bitcoin. that is the asymmetric bet of the century.
Yeah, pretty much.
Doing that. Yeah, that's the only call option I'm looking at. All right, let's finish off with two questions. We'll go around the horn. First of all, how do you guys talk to pre-coiners in your personal lives when people come up to you? Like how do you present it? I know it depends on the type of person you're talking to, but what are some of the common elements of your pre-coiner pitch? Jan, let's start with you.
So I used to start people off with various articles about Bitcoin, like things from Unchained, which I still do. I love the Gradually Then Suddenly series. Thank you, Parker. Big part of my arsenal. But actually, I find that these days, because of what happened in the economy and because of COVID and the money printing and everything that happened, that basically Bitcoiners have been talking about for years, it's actually happening live, and people are aware of it a lot more than they were in the past. Like it happened before, obviously, it happened in 2008. And, I certainly was not aware of what was going on in 2008 until I read Parker's paper called Ender's Game. But like a lot of people slept through that, right? They knew the economy crashed. They knew something happened. They knew the government bailed people out, but they didn't really understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on. I think people are hearing it more in the news now. So what I find has actually been working for me in terms of having people engage with my discussions is like not talking about Bitcoin. It's talking about what's happening now. Cantillon effects, money printing, what is the Fed doing? Why are they doing that? Inflation, deflation, what are these things that are happening? What are the monetary forces in our world? And, starting conversations around that and just kind of mainstream media topics around that helps people just start to ask questions. And then I hit them with the Bitcoin after they start saying like, oh yeah, this doesn't make sense. Like why do the banks get a bailout and I don't, why is that happening? So I think it's important to understand the problem first. And a lot of people, they try to red pill folks on Bitcoin without really telling them what the problem is. They just tell them, here's the solution to this problem you never knew you had. And I think that's kind of not that effective. I think having the problem in mind is effective. And so focusing on monetary policy and focusing on how society's changing, the riots, the inequality, and like looking at where did all of that come from.
It's a good answer. Good answer. Samson, do you have anything to add to that?
So what is a pre-coiner? Someone that's kind of interested in Bitcoin that doesn't have Bitcoin?
Yeah, someone that might come up to you and ask about what the hell's going on, with this money situation and inflation and one question that I get commonly is from my friends now is, well, if the government can just print all this money, why do we pay taxes?
Yeah.
That's the meme of the decade.
Yeah.
It's not even a meme. It's a legit question.
No, it's a legit question, but it's turned into this question that's being answered. Question like more and more. I see it on Twitter every day, and I think it's going to become this like thing in people's minds. Like, why is this system structured this way?
Yeah. But sadly, I think most pre-coiners I get to engage with are asking like, "What's cheap that I can buy?" So it's a really bad way to start it, and I just try to steer them into math and say, do the math. Like, how many Ethereum are there? How many of Ripple are there? And just calculate how much it really costs per unit if you normalize them to 21 million. But the problem is most people are really bad at that, and Bitcoin is almost like something that rewards people to understand numbers, at least at a very basic fundamental level. But if the discussion progresses, typically I will talk to them about like Yan is saying about why are things happening, and then when they really want to understand Bitcoin, I try to compare it to gold. I think that's the simplest concept of a mental construct that they already have, and it's easier to go from there as a starting point about why Bitcoin.
Yep.
Yeah, although I found that a lot of people don't have a concept of gold either because they don't understand that it has monetary premium. Like that's a concept that most people are not familiar with. They think of it like, okay, it's used in jewelry and dentistry and that's why it's valuable. And people don't understand like that gold is hoarded at, in bank vaults, right? So I think that's also an interesting conversation to have. I agree it's a good angle, but I think it requires also diving into that rabbit hole a little bit and saying, look, there's like $8 trillion worth of gold out there, and most of that value is not because it's used in jewelry. So let's figure out why that's the case, right?
Peter Schiff would disagree with you.
I listened to an entire episode of Peter Schiff talk with Peter McCormick on what Bitcoin did, and I just decided that I was going to subject myself to it from the very beginning. I put it on 2x and listened to it all, and man, it was so hard. It was so hard to listen to, and I wish I'd been a part of that. I just feel like it was not. Anyway, so Parker, do you have anything to add to the pre-coiner pitch?
Well, one thing I would say is I don't try to explain Bitcoin to anyone that isn't interested, that hasn't come to me interested, because I just, whether it's the Peter Schiffs of the world or anyone who's new, I find that like it's not worth trying to convince. That somebody's intellectual curiosity has to. They have to have seen something or heard something that has led them to ask the question, because otherwise it's just like talking to a brick wall, and that no one is really going to understand it unless they're genuinely or honestly trying to understand. And then I do think that there's a natural function of can you guys still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That there's a natural function of what the Fed's done where it's just been like ripping the Band-Aid off effectively, that the shock and awe campaign and 3 trillion, I think it's really caused people to wake up when they otherwise wouldn't if it wasn't so large, so quick, and so broad. And that's just naturally causing more people to ask the question. And when they do, I send them to, it's easiest to send them to resources like the Bitcoin Standard, Jan's book. I increasingly send them my own writings depending on what their questions are. Because they're, the type of questions are naturally recurring. And, when I simplify it for people, when they do ask me for the first time, it's, the simple question of would somebody like to be paid in a form of currency that can't be manipulated versus knowing that your government can and does and constantly prints money. The average person doesn't have to
particularly need to know how or why Bitcoin works, but they would choose that first option 9 times out of 10. They just need to know that it exists, and knowledge will naturally distribute. So it's like the principle of don't force somebody down somebody's throat that's not interested in learning. It's not worth your time or theirs, and waiting for them to ask the question, and then depending on it, send them to the resources that kind of are both tailored to either who they are or kind of what the questions are that they're asking.
Yeah, I think it's also another angle that's worked for me is the freedom aspect, like looking at human rights abuses of other a lot of people in America don't think American government abuses human rights. This is a questionable question of some debate, but compared to certainly other more totalitarian governments, it's probably like pretty good. But if you focus on some of the other places that have implemented digital means of payment, censorship, and stuff like that, and tell them about what's going on there, as well as places with like strict capital controls, people can't take money in or out of country. They can't send money back home for remittance without going through capital controls and artificial interest rate, artificial conversion rates. Like these things help, especially in America, when people are so in their American bubble, they don't realize that half the world lives in a completely different reality, and that we are so privileged with having the US dollar as the world reserve currency, and to be able to print just gobs of it and like the world will eat it up. What's actually happening elsewhere is quite different. And I think, again, it's a relatively deep topic, but I really love the video that Alex Gladstein put out. It's like 2 minutes of how currency is digitizing and what that how that it will impact our ability to have freedom with our money. And I think that's a super awesome one. I share that a lot because it hones in on the freedom aspect of money. It's so important to have freedom with our money. And if anybody's come from a regime where that was not the case, they know what that's like. It's not a good situation.
Yeah, I think that's a narrative that we Bitcoiners need to push more often. Leading with the problems with money, I think, is important as well. But talking about the problems with human rights abuses and capital controls and the way money is used to control people and how Bitcoin can improve that situation is also really important. So the last question I want to talk about, kind of just looking at the future. Everybody wants to know expectations for the next 12, 18 months. It's going to happen. We're sort of in this period of accumulation now that we saw happen in 2016. There was like 5 or 6 months of just sideways action before things really popped. What do you guys think are going to be the major driving narratives over the next cycle? I think, we hit on one of them being gold. And what are your expectations for the next bull run? Particularly, I want to hear about the expectations on the altcoin front. Are shitcoins and ICOs going to have another heyday? And is it going to be, if so, to the degree that we saw in 2017? Let's go Jan first in this one, and then back to Samson, and we'll finish with Parker.
Yeah, to me, it's like, I discovered Bitcoin a long time ago, but I only entered into the space properly like around 2016 when I started actually paying attention to the price. And I remember it ranging at like 600, 700, and then in the 900s for a long time. This feels a lot like that, right? Like it's ranging in the 9,000s in the same way it ranged in the 900s. The dollar moves are bigger, but the percentage moves are the same. So it's like, to me, this feels very familiar. And I think it's very interesting that we're now talking, will Bitcoin drop to $6,000 or will it go all the way down to 4,000? Nobody's ever asking the question, is it ever going to come back to 600? Like that price is forgotten at this point, in my opinion. So I think that's interesting. It's establishing a new price memory and a new expectation of value. And, prices have memory, right? This is where we're developing that pattern. I don't know where we're going in the future. I don't have optimism around altcoins going away just because there's more of them. I mean, go to CoinMarketCap. What do we have? Like 5,000 of them? 5,777 right now. Okay. So I think I looked at this like a month ago and it was in the lower 5,000s. So we just printed 100 new currencies in the last month, right? Or hundreds of them. I'm not optimistic for that number to go down. I think it will only go up just because the ease of creating these things is going up. The ease of creating tokens is going up. User experience improvements on tokenization platforms are also a thing. And if it's easy to create your own money, people are going to click a button and they're going to do it. This is something Andreas said a long time ago when he was doing videos on Bitcoin back in the day. He was saying one day it will be as easy as a click of a button to create currencies, and like Johnny in 5th grade will do it. And I fully agree with that. It's going to be a thing, right? We're seeing it play out. Just like pink sheet stocks are a thing, and they haven't gone away just because pink sheet companies are crap companies. They're still traded. So I think this is the world that's here to stay. But I do think that the value will, accrue. Like Parker said, you have to look at it on a liquidity basis, not just by market caps. Market caps are complete fake, junk. Look at what's being moved, what's being traded, where's the depth of market, and it's all in Bitcoin. Where's the depth of brand? It's all in Bitcoin. Go outside on the street, talk to anybody if they've ever even heard of Bcash or Ethereum. Nobody knows about these things. So, I think we're going to see more and more value accrue to Bitcoin, more serious institutions come in and give Bitcoin that reputation that it needs to really succeed. And that's where we're going. I mean, the rest of the stuff is going to be there, it's going to flounder, and people will trade it and try to make more Bitcoin and mostly fail.
Yeah. So I agree with Jan. Like altcoins aren't going away, but I find it harder and harder to believe that they're really going to have a good run, like alt season. I think there's a lot of new cannon fodder, but there's also more and more material. If people do any research at all, they'll understand, the shit runs downhill. No altcoins really sustain like Bitcoin. They have no staying power. They have no real utility, and it's getting so easy to make them. Any idiot can make an altcoin now, and they're super low liquidity. There's no market depth there. They can pump, but then that's it. And by the time they pump, they'll bring in someone looking to FOMO in, but it'll be too late for them, and they might be left holding bags, and they'll look for the next thing. But it's just not going to go away. But I don't think it really matters. It's really all about Bitcoin, as we've been saying. It's the only thing that really matters in this space. So for the next bull run, it's hard to predict what's going to happen, but I think in the next 4 years we'll see 100K Bitcoin. So the question is, when do we get that? Because Bitcoin makes all of its gains typically in a very short window. When we jump from 600s to thousands, that's just like a couple months. So yeah. No one's going to see it coming. It's just going to happen, and people are going to FOMO.
As they do always.
10K to 20K was 3 weeks,
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I was in complete disbelief every one of those days, as all of my friends were asking me, should I buy it at 11? I'm like, no. At 12, no. 14, definitely not. 17, absolutely not. Are you insane? So we're going to see that again. It's just going to be more ridiculous this time. And I think what's interesting is going to be it's going to be harder for the Bitcoin critics, like a Peter Schiff type, who's been basically harping the same message for half a decade now, maybe more, saying Bitcoin's going to fail, Bitcoin's going to fail. I mean, it's very hard to keep telling that story once Bitcoin is 15 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old. It's like, at which point does that story just make absolutely zero sense? And you have to capitulate.
Until it's 5,000 years old.
Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe, I don't know. Gold took a long time.
Parker, what are you looking for when you lay back and dream about the next 18?
I think I'm just generally in agreement. I think that I'm also, I'm not someone who believes that, just when Bitcoin runs that altcoins will run higher. I think that there's obviously economic forces at play, and just kind of on an anecdotal basis, when people call me that haven't been exposed, they're asking, hey, how do I buy Bitcoin? They're not asking me how to buy crypto. Now, many of those people, when they get plugged in, if they go to a place where they can trade multiple, I'm sure that they'll have exposure to it. But that, when the Bitcoin rally will be, kind of driven by a combination of existing holders continuing to accumulate, but then new holders coming in. And I think that as a function of what's happening with global central banks everywhere, we're starting to see that happen increasingly, and that there will likely be some grind, to the prior all-time high, and the real FOMO will start to happen once it kind of gets sustained over that level. And that in that moment, the altcoin traders of the world are going to be faced with the same FOMO that the people who aren't yet involved in Bitcoin, and they're going to have to decide whether they continue to hold their altcoin or shift it into Bitcoin, and that will happen in an increasing way when Bitcoin does begin to break prior all-time highs. And I think that that's also kind of the market test, kind of educating people at the same time. I generally agree with Samson's view. Again, like I think putting the 4-year time frame out, no one knows when it's going to happen, but I think about it really in terms of adoption. Like, will Bitcoin adoption increase by an order of magnitude? Yes. And generally, it's also logical that kind of as Bitcoin grows, it becomes relevant to higher net worth people, so that the people that are adopting it for the first time will, it is becoming more mainstream. They'll generally have more wealth, and they're the type of people who are thinking about it in terms of, oh, I need $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, not do I buy one Bitcoin at $9,000. And so the paradigm does shift in those times. But I'm also recognizing that when it does do that run, as we've seen, historically, there takes time for true liquidity to sustain higher value. So I also think that volatility, that we're not just going to get to 100,000 and be stable, that there will be, pullbacks to 60,000 or 70,000, like the same type of trends exist, and they will, for a reason, that when Bitcoin does have those astronomical rise, and there are those periods of people that just want exposure and are having that FOMO period of buying, that period thereafter is really where people start to learn about Bitcoin and what it is. And even if a small percentage of those people that do get drawn in end up sticking, that creates, kind of multiples higher in terms of forming a base and allowing for liquidity to form. So I expect volatility to remain high, probably a grind to the prior all-time high, and then the FOMO starting thereafter.
All right. It's going to be exciting times to watch. That's what we're here for. That's what we stick around for. I personally am proud to be in here in this fight for Bitcoin alongside the likes of you guys. I think everyone here listening and watching will look back here in, half a decade and beyond, and be really proud of the, work that we did here, the fact that we realized what was happening so early and we're able to be a part of this ride. Really appreciate y'all being with us today. Don't forget, you can get the podcast at swansignalpodcast.com. If you're not able to catch these live in the future, always find it there. That's it. Thanks everyone. Check out swanbitcoin.com. Swan Signal is out.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Peace.
Thanks.